Hi everyone, welcome to our video essay on the Resident Evil 2 remake. Today we'll be diving into a thorough analysis specifically focused on the game's introduction and tutorial level. We want to look at how it guides the player, highlights the game's affordances, and sets expectations for the overall user experience. Resident Evil 2 is a classic survival horror game blended with action-adventure elements, combining tense exploration, resource management, puzzle solving, and combat. We'll be investigating how this opening segment develops a player's understanding of the core game structure, in-game elements, mechanics, UX and game flow affordances, and the assumptions the game makes about the player's prior experience level.
Hello? Is anybody here?
Tutorials are integral to a game's introduction. They provide a safe, risk-free environment for the player to test out the mechanics and control scheme, get a taste of world building, and pick up the tools they'll need for the rest of the journey. A solid introduction is crucial for making a great first impression and avoiding early game frustration. It also ensures accessibility, giving players such as those dealing with language barriers or colorblindness a chance to fine-tune their settings before the real gameplay kicks off. So on that note, let's discuss. Our analysis begins with how the opening gas station sequence establishes the core game structure. Resident Evil 2 doesn't just pause the game to hand you a manual. Instead, it uses environmental design and immediate danger to teach you how to survive. Player control is introduced progressively. Upon entering the gas station, the game strips away distractions, forcing you to master basic movement and camera control. When the area gets dark, your character automatically draws a flashlight, teaching you that the game will contextually assist your visibility, keeping your focus on navigation. The goals in Resident Evil 2 shift rapidly. Initially, your micro goal is simply to investigate. However, once the first zombie attacks, the game establishes its primary win condition: survive and escape. The lose condition is brutally demonstrated here. Let a zombie get too close, and they'll grab you and bite you, visually tearing into your health. This tight, claustrophobic storeroom forces you to engage with the combat mechanics. The tutorial teaches rules and constraints immediately. Headshots don't guarantee instant kills, and ammo is scarce. By forcing the player to aim, the game reveals a hidden mechanic. Standing still shrinks the crosshair, increasing accuracy and damage. This transitions into the core game loop. Carefully explore a dark area, encounter a horrifying threat, decide whether to use precious resources to fight or skillfully evade, and push forward. Through level progression, the game gets more complex. You start in a linear, inescapable corridor, the gas station, to force combat learning, move to a slightly wider obstacle course, the city streets, to teach evasion, and finally arrive at the RPD, the open, puzzle-heavy hub where the real game begins. Beyond structure, the tutorial uses in-game elements to solidify the survival horror tone. The game world is dark, wet, and cluttered, deliberately designed to make you feel trapped. Your player character, whether the rookie cop Leon or college student Claire, reacts realistically to the horror. Their heavy breathing, panicked voice lines, and stumbling animations mirror the player's own tension, reinforcing that they are vulnerable survivors, not action superheroes. To maintain this immersion, the HUD is minimal. Ammo counts fade away when not aiming, keeping the screen clean. Instead, crucial information is moved to the menu and interfaces. The inventory screen introduces the franchise's iconic grid system in the ECG health line: find, caution, danger. You have to pause the game to combine items or check health, making inventory management a deliberate strategic puzzle of its own. Finally, the audio and visual feedback acts as your most vital survival tool. NPCs, specifically the zombies, act as lethal teachers. Their wet footsteps, guttural groans, and the visual gore of where your bullets impact teach you how to locate threats and assess damage without a single health bar on screen. Through this masterclass in environment scaffolding, Resident Evil 2 ensures that by the time you reach the police station, you are perfectly conditioned for the nightmare ahead. Resident Evil 2 displays many types of affordances, including real, false, hidden, and correct rejections. But before we dive into that, I'll address what real and perceived affordances are and how feedback plays a role. Affordances can best be described as inexplicit ways a game communicates its mechanics to the players. It avoids direct communication like text or a step-by-step walkthrough of the mechanic, but instead relies entirely on symbolic messages through the game's environment, and visual and auditory language suggest how a player could, should not, could not interact with an object for a mechanic to be utilized. Real affordances are the mechanics that present themselves with interactions that are actually possible in the game, regardless if it is perceived or not by the player. Perceived affordances are the interactions that the player intuitively feels will give feedback. The feedback is the game mechanic, which is often an action, event, or change that occurs in the game as a result of that interaction. The combination of these two functions of affordances is called a perceptible affordance, meaning the player is successfully able to do what the game implies. Without feedback, an affordance cannot or be very difficult to classify as a perceptible affordance, as the player needs confirmation their action did yield a result. We will analyze Resident Evil 2's affordances, which will help display a better understanding of affordances in games, along with understanding how the tutorial communicates these game mechanics. First, we have perceptible affordances. Take the shiny cabinet key on the wall inside the back room. The glint clearly communicates you can pick this up. These are foundational building blocks of player education. By giving the player clear visual wins like a key that glints, the game builds your confidence and teaches you the basic grammar of the world. If it glows, it's important. In contrast, there's correct rejection, an unsuspecting tool in a player experience. This is when a tool looks at a shelf full of canned food and rightly ignores them because they don't glow or prompt an interaction. This supports learning by preventing cognitive overload. If you could pick up and examine every single bag of chips in this gas station, you'd spend an hour doing grocery inventory instead of learning how to survive. By letting you easily reject the background noise, the game keeps your focus entirely on the core pillars: exploration, resource management, and survival. But survival horror doesn't want you feeling too comfortable, which brings us to false affordances. This happens when something looks actionable, but the game denies you. For example, you see a normal looking door in the gas station, but when you try it, it's blocked off. In a standard app or website, this is bad UX, but in a horror game, it's a tool. While it temporarily hinders your progress, it quickly teaches you the spatial boundaries of the play space, narrowing your focus to the real path forward while instantly dialing up the feeling of claustrophobia and entrapment. Then, the game pulls the rug from under you entirely with a hidden affordance. This is an object that has a major function but hides any initial visual cue. Think about that seemingly dead zombie slumped on the floor of the gas station. You perceive it as a background dressing, just scenery. Suddenly it wakes up. Does this hinder straightforward learning? Absolutely. It punishes you for making safe assumptions. But in terms of general learning, it's brilliant. In one single jump scare, the game forces a total psychological shift. The intense cortisol hit sharpens your attention for the rest of the game, increasing player engagement, and makes you second guess every corpse you see. Now we will discuss 3 principles of game flow and their most effective and least effective implementations, along with how it affects player learning, engagement, and experience in the tutorial. Navigating a pitch black corridor with only a flashlight forces the player to actively scrutinize their environment, scanning for interactive doors or blind corners. Because players can't predict whether a zombie is lurking around the next bend, the horror atmosphere, heightened by flickering lights, dripping water, and ominous silence, effectively commands their full attention. This constant threat of the unknown keeps the player deeply focused on each progressive section of the level, teaching them to never become complacent. Upon turning a corner, the player encounters an obese zombie preoccupied with a vending machine. The ensuing combat feels lackluster and unsatisfying. Defeating the enemy merely requires repeatedly mashing the attack button, even after the target is knocked to the ground. Because the target is massive and the combat lacks directional aiming, the encounter demands very little skill or finesse. As a result, the repetitive mechanical task drains the scene of tension, causing the player's focus to drift. While this moment could be interpreted as a comedic gag, a hungry overweight zombie looking for a snack, and technically serves as a tension release tool, within the broader game flow structure, it ultimately diminishes the player's active concentration on the gameplay loop. The game excels at providing immediate, visceral feedback that communicates damage, scaling based on shot placement. Scoring a headshot triggers a distinct blood splatter, a heavy sound effect, and a pronounced physical flinch from the zombie, clearly signaling a significant impact. This clear feedback loop naturally incentivizes the player's aim for the head, a high-risk, high-reward mechanical challenge. Conversely, dumping an entire magazine into a zombie's torso with no visible degradation in its behavior creates player frustration. The game fails to offer a clear indication of why the enemy isn't falling. When contrasted with the high feedback headshot mechanic, the player is left to deduce that the chest is simply an inefficient target despite being the easiest to hit. The game fosters deep environmental immersion through detailed world building. Inside the police headquarters, players can find a large monument inscribed with the names of fallen lieutenants under the text in loving memory. These elements ground the architecture in a tangible history, reminding the player of the society that existed before the outbreak and making the game world feel lived in and real. Despite the game's impressive graphical fidelity, realistic textures, and detailed particle effects, certain mechanical shortcuts break the reality of the simulation. When a zombie appears at a window, the UI prompts the player to barricade it, operating under a classic action-oriented inventory system. The player instantly materializes massive wooden planks from their pockets, barricading the window instantly without an animation, hammer, or nails. Despite its excellent design, the tutorial makes significant assumptions about the player's prior experience. Foremost, it assumes advanced 3D camera and interface literacy. By immediately thrusting the player into a tight dark space with an aggressive zombie, the game assumes you already possess the muscle memory to navigate with one thumbstick while simultaneously aiming with the other. This strongly supports veteran gamers but actively excludes complete novices who may struggle with dual-stick spatial awareness under intense pressure. Furthermore, the game expects a baseline understanding of survival horror tropes. It assumes you will instinctively know how to hoard limited ammunition and combine healing items, rather than utilizing them immediately. However, a player lacking this genre literacy might empty their entire magazine into the first enemy, inadvertently hitting a punishing progression wall. While this lack of handholding heightens the horror for genre veterans, it creates a steep learning curve for newcomers. In conclusion, the opening of the Resident Evil 2 remake is an incredible example of a seamless tutorial. By weaving its core structure directly into the environment, it effectively teaches the player its brutal rules without relying on intrusive text boxes or pause menus. Through clear visual and auditory affordances like the dynamic aiming reticle, responsive gore system, and terrifying audio cues, the game flawlessly communicates the high stakes of this world. Furthermore, its great application of game flow principles ensures that the challenge scales perfectly, transitioning the player from a claustrophobic controlled encounter into a chaotic evasion test. While its assumptions regarding dual-stick camera literacy and genre tropes may alienate complete beginners, it perfectly immerses its intended audience. Our final judgment is that this introduction stands as a triumph of its survival horror design. It doesn't just teach you how to press buttons, it conditions you on how to survive, leaving you fully prepared for the nightmare waiting inside the police station.